The year is 1177 BC. In a single generation, the greatest civilizations on Earth vanish. Not one empire falls. Every empire falls. Egypt calls them the Sea Peoples. No one knows who they truly were, or where they came from. But wherever they went, kingdoms burned. Just decades earlier, this was the most connected world humanity had ever built. A network of empires trading gold, tin, and secrets across the sea. Kings wrote to each other as brothers. Palaces gleamed with imported ivory. This was civilization at its peak. So what could bring it all down at once? Then, in less than 50 years, it was gone. Cities abandoned. Writing systems forgotten. An entire world erased. And historians are still piecing together why. To understand the fall, we must first understand the world that rose before it. Around 1500 BC, the Eastern Mediterranean became a stage for giants. In Egypt, pharaohs ruled from the Nile with unmatched wealth. Their armies were feared. Their temples touched the sky. To the north, the Hittites commanded a mountain empire of iron discipline, ruling from their fortress capital, Hattusa. Across the sea, the Mycenaeans built palace fortresses in Greece, masters of bronze weapons and daring sea trade. And on the Levantine coast stood Ugarit, a city so connected it may have invented the world's first alphabet. These four powers and more were bound together by one fragile thread: trade. This network ran on one metal above all others: bronze. And bronze needed two ingredients that came from opposite ends of the known world: copper and tin. Copper came from Cyprus, but tin was rare. Some believe it traveled from as far away as Afghanistan, passing through dozens of hands before reaching the forge. One broken link in this chain, and an entire kingdom's weapons, tools, and armies could grind to a halt. The system was powerful, but it was also incredibly fragile. And it wasn't only trade holding this world together. Royal marriages, diplomatic letters, and treaties bound kings from Egypt to Hattusa in an uneasy peace. By 1200 BC, this fragile balance had lasted for generations, but far beyond the borders of these great kingdoms, something was beginning to move. It began quietly. Egyptian scouts reported strange ships along the coast, vessels unlike any seen before, carrying warriors from unknown lands. Pharaoh Ramesses III received the warning in his throne room. His advisors urged caution, but no one yet understood the scale of what was coming. Historical records confirm raids intensifying along the coasts of Cyprus and the Levant. Confirmed fact: multiple kingdoms began fortifying their cities in response. At the same time, a very different danger struck. Letters from Ugarit's king spoke of failed harvests and empty granaries. Nature itself seemed to be turning against them. Drought, famine, raiders on the horizon. 3 warnings arriving together, and still, the great kingdoms believed their walls would be enough to save them. In Hattusa, the Hittite king faced his own crisis. Grain shipments from Egypt, once reliable, had slowed to a trickle. His empire was starving from within. Desperate, the Hittite king wrote to Ugarit, demanding ships and grain immediately. Confirmed fact: such letters exist in the archaeological record, revealing a kingdom on the edge of collapse. But Ugarit had troubles of its own. Its king wrote back. His own ships were gone, sent to help defend other coastlines. There was nothing left to give. Every kingdom was asking its neighbors for help. And every kingdom was discovering the same terrifying truth. There was no help left to give. Then came the warning no one could ignore. A final letter from Ugarit's king, written as enemy ships approached his own shore. And it would be the last anyone ever heard from him. Days later, Ugarit burned. Archaeologists would later find that final letter still baked into the clay of the palace archive. Never sent, never answered. Word of Ugarit's fall spread like fire itself. Coastal cities up and down the Levant began evacuating, but where could they possibly go? In Hattusa, the Hittite capital itself now stood vulnerable. With no grain, no ships, and enemies closing in, the empire that once ruled through iron discipline began to unravel. Confirmed fact, within years, Hattusa was abandoned entirely. Historians still debate whether it fell to invaders, internal rebellion, or simply starvation and collapse from within. One by one, the great powers of the Bronze Age were falling, not from a single blow, but from a storm of crises striking all at once. And Egypt, the mightiest of them all, was next in its path. Ramesses III prepared for war. Egyptian scribes recorded his words. He would make the invaders into ashes. It was a promise the entire kingdom now depended on. The sea peoples came by land and by sea at once, entire families traveling with them in ox carts, suggesting this was not just an army, but a migration of displaced peoples. At the mouth of the Nile, Ramesses III set his trap. Archers lined the riverbanks. Egyptian ships waited hidden among the reeds. The Battle of the Delta was about to begin. When the Sea People's ships entered the Delta, the trap sprang. Fire arrows rained down. Egyptian vessels rammed the invaders' ships, trapping them against the riverbanks. By nightfall, Egypt had won. The Sea People's fleet lay burning in the reeds. Ramesses III had saved his kingdom, but the cost of victory would prove far greater than anyone expected. Egypt had survived the invasion, but something strange began to happen in the years that followed. The victory didn't bring recovery. It brought silence. Records show worker strikes in the royal tombs, the first ever documented in history. Grain payments to laborers had stopped completely. Even the pharaoh's own builders were starving. This was the first clue to a deeper truth. The invasion hadn't caused the collapse. It had only revealed a crisis that was already tearing the empire apart from within. Modern climate scientists have found the missing piece. Ice core and pollen data revealing a prolonged mega-drought gripped the entire eastern Mediterranean for nearly 150 years. Crops failed for generations. Rivers ran low. Entire populations began migrating just to survive. And some of those desperate migrants may have been the very sea peoples Egypt had fought. This changed everything historians thought they knew. The sea peoples weren't a single invading army. They may have been victims of the same catastrophe as everyone else, pushed into violence by desperation. But climate and famine alone don't explain everything. Clay tablets from this era also describe a wave of devastating earthquakes striking multiple cities within the same few decades. Drought, famine, earthquakes, migration, invasion. Not one single villain, but 5 catastrophes converging at once, each one weakening the kingdoms further until none could stand alone. And there was one more factor, quieter, but just as deadly. The very trade network that made these kingdoms great also made them vulnerable. When one link broke, the entire system broke with it. For decades, historians searched for one villain to blame, but the evidence, gathered piece by piece across 60 years of research, was pointing toward a truth far more unsettling than any invasion. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected place: the palace archives of Pylos in Greece, where clay tablets recorded desperate last-minute military preparations before the city fell. The tablets described watchers stationed along the coast, rowers assigned to ships, and bronze being urgently redistributed to smiths. Pylos knew the danger was coming, and prepared anyway to fail. Despite every preparation, Pylos fell and burned so completely that its clay tablets, meant to be temporary records, were accidentally preserved forever by the very fire that destroyed the palace. Piecing together Egypt, Hattusa, Ugarit, and Pylos, modern researchers finally connected the evidence. This was not one war. It was total systems collapse. Every kingdom failing under its own combined weight of crises, all at once. The shocking truth wasn't that the Bronze Age world was destroyed by an enemy. It was that no single enemy was needed at all. The world had simply become too interconnected and too fragile to survive its own success. But if the system collapsed everywhere, why did some places survive? Egypt endured, wounded, but alive. The answer lay in what each kingdom depended on, and how deeply. Egypt had the Nile, a self-contained lifeline immune to the collapse of foreign trade routes. Kingdoms without such a lifeline had nothing left to fall back on. This became the final, unsettling lesson of the Bronze Age collapse. The more connected and specialized a civilization becomes, the more catastrophically it can fall when that connection breaks. Writing itself vanished for nearly 3 centuries in some regions. An entire era plunged into what historians call a dark age. Knowledge, art, and memory lost to time. And yet, from these ashes, something new would eventually rise. Smaller kingdoms, new alphabets, new ideas, laying the groundwork for the classical world that followed. Collapse, it turns out, was also a beginning. 3,000 years later, we still live in a deeply interconnected world, one built on global trade, fragile supply chains, and networks that span every ocean. The Bronze Age collapse asks a question we still haven't fully answered. What happens when the links we depend on, for food, for energy, for trade, begin to break? Not one at a time, but all together. The Bronze Age world never saw it coming. Would we? The Bronze Age collapse remains one of history's greatest warnings, not carved in stone, but written in ash, in empty granaries, and in the silence of cities that simply stopped speaking. If this journey into history moved you, subscribe to Dark Files, where the world's greatest mysteries are uncovered, one story at a time. This has been a Dark Files production. Every collapse leaves a lesson buried in its ashes, and every ending is just history waiting to be uncovered again. Thank you for watching.